Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast Successful, Wealthy, and Confident. I have brought on a special guest, Shanna Stevens. She is a holistic coach. So I'm really excited to bring her on because we all know the coaching industry a little bit. We all, especially if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you kind of understand what a coach is and what it does. But I've never had a holistic coach come on here. So thank you, Shanna, so much for coming on. And Shanna, let's go ahead and start off this podcast with just like a brief introduction of like what you do, how you became a holistic coach, and what exactly is a holistic coach.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for having me. This is so cool. So thank you. Uh,
Yeah.
so as as far as holistic, not everybody knows what holistic means,
Hmm.
and there's many different approaches to holistic. So to me, holistic emphasizes the self and the
Yeah.
connection of the mind, the body, spirit, and emotions. So, emotions meaning energy in motion, and it's not a concept that a lot of us grew up with.
Yeah.
Talking about emotions, being aware of emotions. I mean, I wasn't, and
Mhm.
being accountable for our own well-being is holistic. So, for me, a little bit about my story. I grew up in a faith-based home out here in Utah
Mhm.
and came from the most loving, kind, compassionate, service minded family. And being one of the oldest of 10 children, we learned a lot of different ways to survive on a school teacher's salary. Mom was a school bus driver and a substitute teacher. And so there was a lot
Yeah.
of needs that weren't getting met. And today, knowing what I know and the training that I've been through, it doesn't matter if you're a single child or if you're a family of a from a large family.
Yeah.
As a human being, we just don't get our needs met, period. We just
Yeah.
don't. And they say it's impossible to get a single child's needs all met anyway. So here we are doing the best we can. And coming from a large family, I have no blame. I wouldn't do anything differently. But as I
Hmm.
got older, I started to pick up on patterns that didn't serve me anymore. I
Yeah.
had abandoned myself. I was using substances to cover up my emotions, because I thought, I'm going to go out and make some unhealthy choices, cover up my emotions, because that's what I knew how to do.
Yeah.
And I was in some pretty emotional pain. Um,
Yeah.
it wasn't until probably about, I would say probably 4 or 5 years ago, really, when I started on the journey of who am I really?
Hmm.
So I had lost my sense of self. I had reached for substances. I had gone outside myself to look for answers, validation, what I would call blobbing on inserting myself into people's conversations to be seen and
Yeah.
heard, because that's what I knew how to do. And knowing a little bit differently now, there's other ways that are a lot healthier is what it comes down to.
Yeah.
So, and that's kind of what started it for me. I came across, I had someone introduce a podcast to me. It was called the Adult Chair Model or the Adult Chair, and
Hmm.
I had started listening to that in 2020, and things that were being said on the podcast really resonated with me. And what was being said was a holistic understanding of where my patterns and limiting beliefs came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't realize that I had been borrowing my caregiver's beliefs
Yes. Hmm.
for so long. And when someone spelled it out to me that, hey, now that you're an adult, you have the choice to do things differently. I was like, what? I do? That is so cool, right? I didn't know. You don't know what you don't know. So I started down that path of what what else don't I know, from an emotional, mentally healthy, spiritual place. And I discovered the difference between being religious versus being spiritual. And I I would say I'm more of a spiritual person. These
Yeah.
days I've developed into more spirituality, and the connections I've been able to make with people because of that has been so beautiful.
Yeah.
I mean, I want to pause there and see if there's anything um, that you wanted me to touch on, or if we wanted to go in a different direction.
Yeah, yeah. So what I love about what you said is, borrowing the belief systems from your family and from the people around you. That's something that we don't necessarily realize as we're growing up, because from the ages of 0 to 7, we are walking subconscious minds. Our childhood actually imprints a lot of our belief systems and of how we function as adults. And I just find it so interesting that you were able to, just from a podcast, be able to, okay, I can actually do things differently, and I can actually have that self-awareness to be able to change my behavior.
Hmm.
Because, so what I would love to like dig in a little bit deeper is like how you made that choice, because there can be people out there who are listening to these kinds of podcasts and who want to help themselves but don't necessarily know how. And haven't come to the realization or the decision making process that they need to change their behavior by being more self aware. So,
Mhm.
like, what was kind of the catalyst for you to be able to make that change? Like, okay, I want to be self aware, and I can do things differently, so I'm going to. What was there like something in your life that you were just kind of fed up with, or like what happened to make you make that decision?
Yes. Well, I was going to say unfortunately, but actually it's fortunately. You get
Yeah.
to a pain point where the pain is enough. I was in such
Yes.
emotional pain of being rejected,
Hmm.
not knowing who I was, that I was like, there's got to be more. There's got to be more to
Yeah.
this. So, being at that emotional low, depression, again, unhealthy behaviors. I was covering up with substance, and I just
Yeah.
didn't like the way I felt. So the pain was heavy enough to be like, okay, okay. Um, Number one, I want to go back. If you guys are listening, if you're listening to this podcast, there's no accident. There's a reason why you came across this podcast. So I want to put that out there energetically, spiritually, that if this is you, and if something resonates in
Hmm.
here, that there's a reason. Okay. So yeah, for me, the pain and the rejection of who I thought I was for people, for myself, was enough to question who am I really. So um, I again I went to this podcast and they start talking about simplifying life, and I was like, okay, let's hear what you have to say about simplifying it. And this model, this healthy adult model, really
Hmm.
broke it down into three phases: child, adolescent, and adult. And when you talked about the child phase, 0 to 7, that's what this is. So the child phase is ages 0 to 6. So 6, 7, depending on your experiences in life and who you are, right?
Yeah.
0 meaning in utero. So the
Oh,
way
like in the womb.
in the womb. So the way
Okay.
that this model describes it, before we're ever born, there's frequency and vibrations being picked up in our emotional bodies that we're learning patterns and behaviors before we're ever born. When mom's pregnant, in the environment, is there contention going on, right? Are there
Right.
harsh words being passed back and forth? So this is the holistic approach here. Was the tummy being touched or sang to, taught to? Was the tummy being nurtured? So
Wow.
here we are learning these frequencies, our bodies, our nervous systems are
Yeah.
learning patterns and behaviors before we're ever born into the environment. Okay, you guys, are you with me?
That's mind blowing. I always knew it was at a very young age, but in my mind, zero meant like when you're birthed and then you start sucking in all of the information around you. It didn't click to me that it was in the womb as well. So
Yes,
my mind is being blown right now. Like that's insane that like even before you're born, your environment is still impacting you.
absolutely. Yep. I had somebody share with me that she was pregnant twice, two different fathers. The first
Mhm.
child was born in a loving home. The father's voice was present in the home when she was pregnant with him.
Yeah.
And when she was doing things that she loved, she was doing activities, so that when that child was born, um, that's the environment that he was born into. And today he's 20 something. His nervous system is able to handle challenges, is able to do things differently than the second child that was born without a male presence. And then
Mm.
when the baby's born and there's no male voices around, they wonder, where's this male voice, or why are things differently in my environment when they were this way when I was in the womb? And
Oh.
when she was pregnant with the daughter, she had a very stressful marriage, divorce, separation, trying to find work, like a very stressful environment. And now that little nervous system is handling life differently than that first baby.
Wow.
She validated that. She's like, I am mind blown. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. Yeah. So in essence, these are things that we can't control, right? When we're in the womb, we can't control if our parents are in a loving home or whether it's stressful. So as a holistic coach who works with people who have these challenges, like what's something kind of encouraging and empowering that you can say to the people that had no control over this and was in the womb when there were stressful things going on.
Yeah, love this question. So, one of the
Yeah.
things that we do with my clients is we become aware. So, we'll share the information that we just shared today.
Yeah.
And then, just like you, they sit in a shift, an energy shift that is empowering. Knowledge is empowering. So to know where they're coming
Hmm.
from and where
Yeah.
their environment was, they're like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. So holistically, they're going inside and they're making their own connections and they're saying, okay, so that actually wasn't my fault.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't. So then, from a healthy adult, which is what we'll get into, we go to
Hmm.
what's true. What's really true? Truth and
Yeah.
fact is where a tool that what we teach for them to take with them what's true about the situation, so that truth creates safety for them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
So it's kind of like, the truth setting you free.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The truth shall set you free. There's something to that, right? When we stay out
Yeah.
of stories and assumptions, which we'll talk about, that
Hmm.
comes from our ego, our adolescent phase, that middle phase, we'll go into that a little bit more. When we
Hmm.
stay out of that, there's more room to feel, oh, there's freedom, there's peace. I'm not tied up into these stories of trying to make sense of what was what I thought was true.
Yeah, yeah. So let's backtrack a little bit. So this is a podcast series, right? We're talking about the healthy adult and the three phases. So this first podcast is really about the child phase. Um, so I know that we've dug into it a little bit already, but like what exactly is the child phase as far as the three phases to being a healthy adult?
Mm, yeah, that's our inner child.
Inner child. Mm-hmm.
The child phase is our inner child. So the age of 0 to 6, I'm going to reference as 6 years old. So 0 to 6 years old, there's no discernment in the child phase. You think of a
Mm-hmm.
preschooler, you think of a kindergartner, someone in first grade, they're living their fullest life. They're singing, dancing, they're saying
Yeah.
things that make us giggle because there's no filter, discernment of what's truth, what's not true, right or wrong. They're just being themselves authentically, right?
Right.
So that's what we end up losing or covering up as we grow into our ego or adolescent phase. And again, we'll touch on that. And I'm so glad that this is a series because there's so much good information here. I want to keep it simple.
Yeah. Yeah.
So our child phase is our inner child. Okay, so there are things that happen to us in childhood, like abandonment, neglect.
Right.
Um, let's say once we're born into the environment and mom's doing other things, she might put baby down on the floor to cry so that she can get other things done. Or what if mom leaves baby in the crib to break habits or try to train, new sleeping habits? Baby's crying. That's the only way they know how to communicate. And they're
Mhm.
feeling, why is nobody coming to get me? Why am I not enough to be picked up? Why am I not enough? Why am I being neglected? So there again, our nervous systems, our little belief systems are starting to create wounding. I
Mm-hmm.
am not being paid attention to. And again, there's some unfortunate things that happen to children around abuse and trauma uh that they grow through life, in a really hard way. I work with a lot of trauma clients with to help
Yeah.
these nervous systems and to watch their growth is beautiful. Um, but these wounds then, so we go from child phase into the adolescent, and these wounds get passed along. Okay, so in childhood, you can say this might be our GPS or a navigational system that's being created in our unconscious mind, our subconscious mind. So you
What
set
we
it
base everything off of.
correct.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. So that navigational system, which is the wounding, everything that we believe is true. So we learn what's true around our caregivers, what's being said, the way we're being treated. Maybe that's how I'm supposed to be treated. We take that into our next phase of life.
Wow, that actually makes so much sense because, there's that pattern where even in like romantic relationships, we end up looking for people or looking for situations that were similar to our parents because that's all we know. Even that's not necessarily what we want. But when you said that, like my immediate thought was, I know people who don't want to be their parents, but then they're in relationships and the romantic relationships is the exact dynamic as their parents. And it's just like, how can that be when you don't like how your parents speak to each other? You
Right.
don't like the dynamic, but then you are choosing to be in a romantic relationship that has the exact same dynamic.
Exactly. Exactly. Because that's what our subconscious was programmed to do
Ugh,
unconsciously, right?
yeah.
Being raised in a large family, my father was a school teacher, and out of 10 of us kids, we're like, we're never going to be a school teacher. They don't make the money, that it's just not worth it watching our parents, suffer with raising a large family with not a lot of money. And 6 out of 10 of us became school teachers,
Mhm.
even though we didn't want it. That's what we knew.
Right.
So we tried so hard not to do that, but we did. So, not a bad thing. I absolutely loved teaching school. I was
Mhm.
able to connect with students, and then I burned out quickly because I gave and gave and gave and wasn't aware that that's not a healthy behavior or a pattern to have. So moving down the journey, I realized that it didn't have to be that way.
Yeah,
And that's where, again, just knowing that there's options, it doesn't have to be that way. I was like, okay, then let's take a look at options.
right,
So,
right.
uh, we kind of got off track there. Where were we going with that?
So we're going with like how is this even important, right? So we're talking about the inner child. We're talking about how these subconscious patterns are ingrained within
Yes.
us, even without our knowledge. And then we grow up and we're displaying similar habits, things that we don't necessarily want our life to be like. So it's just how do we rise above it? And my first thought with that is, well, we're doing things that we're comfortable with. We're doing things that are familiar. I think that
Mhm.
familiarity is what the subconscious mind is basically telling us to do. Like this is, even though you don't like this, it's familiar and it feels more safe because it is familiar. So for me, my first thought is kind of getting this habit of being able to step outside of your comfort zone, being able to be uncomfortable, because if you don't want to be, a school teacher and you want to be, like a coach, or
Yeah.
your the life of your dreams, right?
Yes.
It needs to be a little bit uncomfortable. So how
Yes.
do we?
I love that you're going here with this because it was not
Mhm.
safe to be uncomfortable as a child. So to
Right.
get out of your comfort zone, we introduce the healthy adult, which creates that safety. So what we want to do is we want to be able to say, hey, I have the safety skills today to keep myself safe. I can call 911 if I need to. I can
Yeah.
eat the foods that I need to, right? All these things that are true today. We go back in session and we say, hey, little one. And there's so many different ages that show up depending on what you're going through in the moment. This little one that does show up, it's like, okay, so you're safe. I'm going to create a space where I'm just going to listen to what you have to say. And we give that little one their voice back. How many of us, how many of us did not get to hear the things that we needed to hear as a child? You are enough. You are beautiful. You are creative. I do love you. I support you. And our little child will sometimes not even know who we are when we start first showing up. And you know what we do to build that trust is consistency. So we'll go in and we'll say, do you recognize me? They may or may not. If they don't, you say, I love you, and I'll be back tomorrow. And then we show up the next day. Are you ready? I'm here to listen. Anything you have to share. And sometimes it takes a couple of days, a couple of times. And that's okay. Because as a healthy adult, we have patience. We have compassion. We have understanding where this little child's coming from. Something that we never got modeled for us.
Mhm.
So now we go and give that to our child, our inner child, and that inner child will then start building. It happens all the time, Priscilla. It happens. I have yet that it doesn't happen when a little child shows up and starts to speak and say, I just need a hug. Okay. Then we're able to give them what they need. Or I just need you to sit and play cards with me. You got it. Right? So in our healthy adult, we're conscious and we're giving the subconscious or the unconscious safe attention, building trust with her or him, letting them know you're safe to be uncomfortable. You know what? You're safe to feel fear. You're okay. And then we can start expanding and exploring who we're here to be. It's such a beautiful work.
It's incredible that whenever I've done like inner child work, I didn't even think to ask if you recognize me. That's something that really popped up for me when you were talking about that. Like, if you're not showing up for that part of you, or you're maybe showing up for that part of you for the very first time, it is a sign of respect to be like, hey, do you even recognize me? Because I'm an adult. Maybe you don't even realize that I'm an adult you.
Yeah, yeah. We will go in and say, hey, first of all, we'll start with a simple hi. And sometimes it's distance. Sometimes I just recently worked with a client who it was 5 miles away, but yet she was able to see her and she didn't want to have anything to do with the client, the little child. And the child was uh, younger, 12, 13 even.
Mhm.
So that part showed up for her. And as she just kept showing up every session, that child got closer and closer and closer to her. And then finally she was able to write a big will with her. And she says it's changed the relationship with her coworkers, just being that close to her
I
child, her inner child. That's the power of this work.
love that. It's we grow up and this is such a fast-paced environment. We're constantly doing, 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 especially in the United States. And we never stop to think that we may have grown up, but we still have that childlike part of ourselves.
Yeah.
And when we're scared and when we're doing things that are uncomfortable, and especially this self-development work, it's always going to be uncomfortable because that's required for our own growth. And to be able to talk to that part of ourselves instead of like abandoning it or not even recognizing it. I mean, this is something that maybe a lot of people don't even realize, like working with the inner child, and then you finally do make that contact and it's like you abandoned me. I'm scared. You're
Mm,
trying to better your life, but it's uncomfortable and I'm scared and you're not recognizing me. So of course I'm upset with you. That
yes.
makes so much sense.
Yes. And as the adult, we show up, and what we got modeled was I'm right here. The first time that we learn how to interact with our inner child, it's we want to force them to pay attention to us. Listen to what I have to say.
Right.
We force our agenda on the child, of course, because that's what we were modeled. However, this is a different approach. We want to give that child the space and the opportunity to feel their feelings, to hear their voice, to give them their choices. And when we sit and we validate, like what you just said, I don't recognize you. As a healthy adult, this is my response. I can understand why you feel that way.
Oh my gosh. I feel that. Wow. So let me ask you this then, because I have been seeing this a lot within the spiritual community. It sounds like the ego, the fear-based part of ourselves, you are relating that more to like the adolescent. So I would love to hear your take on what the difference is between the inner child that feels fear and feels that discomfort, and then, right, the adolescent ego.
Yes. So in childhood, there's our wounding, right? And then our program passes it along around 6, 7, 8 years old, depending. Um, then this is when our ego comes online scientifically. So biologically, this is when our brains start to develop and we start noticing, hey, we're different than our siblings, or I'm different than mom, or I'm different than dad, right? And then our
Yeah.
ego is created to keep us safe, to keep us. There's three main and we're going to go into this more into the next series, but there's three main
Hmm.
functions of our ego in our adolescent phase. It's to keep us safe,
Hmm.
alive, and accepted into the tribe, accepted somewhere. So in adolescence, in the ego phase, in the adolescent phase, this is where ego comes online, and ego doesn't exist in our childhood. So it's literally in childhood that fear is, it could be, am I not doing things correctly? Am I going to get hurt? There's just an unsafety factor to it, right? When someone throws a joke at a child, they don't recognize criticism. They don't recognize joking because their brains don't have that capacity yet. When ego comes online, they start learning, oh, I'm supposed to laugh at that. Okay, that's a joke. So our ego
Ah,
does that for us, right? So it helps us discern.
right. Huh? Okay, that makes sense. Okay, great. So I would love to hear more about, how we can move forward while being that healthy adult for the inner child. So what we learned in this podcast today is that our inner child actually has a lot to do with our patterns, with how we are actually, if we're a healthy adult or not, right? If we're actually doing the things that we want to do. So what are some tips that you would recommend, maybe on a daily or a weekly, monthly basis, that you can do in order to create a really good relationship with your inner child so that you can function as you really want to be as an adult?
Yeah. Yes. So I'll say, I'll offer a couple of tools here so that we can have some takeaways. Number one is that you're curious. We're aware, we're aware that there's something different. There's something else, right? And that's how I started my
Mm-hmm.
journey. I was aware and then I was curious about it. So curiosity and awareness is a great tool to say, okay,
Yeah.
what am I feeling? What's going on with me? Something doesn't feel good. Something's off. First tool, curiosity, awareness. The next thing is what what do I what might I be feeling? And then actually sitting in it. So sitting in that feeling is the healthy option. Okay. Dr. Joan Rosenberg worked with some neuroscience scientists that they found that feeling emotion doesn't have to take that long. If emotion is energy and through trauma and things that happen, it gets stuck in our bodies, that
Right.
causes problems. If we can help that energy move, the body will metabolize that. So if we're having a feeling or an emotion, if we can sit in it for 90 seconds or less, the body will metabolize that energy, that emotion, and then it's gone. So number two is to sit in it, feel that emotion. And you can only do that from a healthy adult. If your ego has anything to say, it's going to say, don't feel your emotions. It's going to hurt. It's going to be scary and you
Right.
might die. Right? So, as a
Yes.
healthy adult, we're going to say, okay, ego, thank you. I've got this. I'm going to feel my feelings and I'm going to get curious about what's happening. And then the third thing is, what do I want to feel instead?
Yeah.
What do I want to feel instead? Let's go to the opposite side. What's on the other side of that? Let's say, I don't know, anxiety. Let's take anxiety, for example. If you're starting to feel a sensation in your body, could be, I mean, what's some physical ailments of anxiety?
Like your stomach
Stomach,
in knots.
knots,
Mm-hmm.
sweaty
It's hard to
palm,
breathe.
heavy breathing. So signs of
Mm-hmm.
anxiety, you're getting curious. Okay, this is starting to feel like anxiety. So I'm staying
Mm-hmm.
curious, right? Now I'm going to sit and feel it and breathing. So breathing helps us move the energy through.
Yeah.
Feeling the sensations, breathing. What do I want to feel instead? So the number one uh, thing that people are looking for is I want to feel safe. I want to feel okay.
Mm, yeah.
So let's feel safe. So I'm going to put my hand on my body and I'm going to let myself know I'm here. I'm in my body. We just do a little bit of tapping. I'm safe. I'm okay. And what we have found is that I've had clients reach back out to me, but okay, so that tapping thing works. I'm so glad because it does work, right? So this helps us come in back into our body. So these
Yeah,
are just a few tools that we can only do in our healthy adult. So
right.
if we're having a feeling, an emotion, that's in our child phase. Child phase is where our true emotions and our true feelings live.
Okay.
Vulnerability comes from our child phase.
Mm, wow. There's this epidemic of people not wanting to feel their emotions because maybe they were taught as a child that it's not, especially with certain genders, it's not manly to feel your emotions, right? And then it can manifest differently with people. Um, the there is a potent fear, I think, on a society level about like feeling your emotions out of fear of being judged, you know?
Yep, yep. I love
And
that you went here with this. When society has anything to do with it, your ego is going to agree.
okay.
Okay, because that's going to keep you safe. That's going to keep you in the herd,
Right, right.
right?
And that's a survival instinct too, is
Yep,
is is being able to be accepted into the herd. So
yep,
of course
yep.
it's with the ego because it's with survival.
Exactly. So the men, the men that I work with, when they hear the words, "You're safe to feel your emotions,"
Mhm.
it's it is unreal to watch them cry, to watch them shift. They give themselves permission, first of all,
Right.
to feel their emotion, and there's no shame in it. They're human also.
Mhm.
Some of my quickest, my clients with the quickest shifts have been the guys that have given themselves permission to feel their emotions.
Mhm.
They'll even go into the restroom at work and feel an emotion, or they'll go out to their car and feel it so that the judgment or people in their workspace doesn't interrupt the process of the emotion.
Mhm. Right, right. No, that makes perfect sense. Incredible. Thank you so much, Shanna. I think that this has been really a very impactful conversation, right? We're not taught these tools growing up. We're not taught the fact that our inner child is still within us as an adult and that that's where our emotions come from. So thank you so much. I love that we're going to have a really clear idea of what the healthy adult is because we're taking our time with it. So for the listeners out there, this is the first of 3 podcasts. So we are actually going to deep dive into each phase for the healthy adult with this podcast. So this podcast was all about the child phase. Now, Shanna, is there anything that you think um, that we can leave with the listeners about being more loving towards their inner child?
Yeah.
And yeah, what would you say to them?
Number one, what happened to you as a child is not your fault. Number
Mhm.
two, you're listening to this podcast for a reason. Yep. And when you have the urge to go ride a bike, to go skiing, snowboarding, to do something fun and creative, dancing, do it. That's your inner child. That's you connecting with your inner child.
Mhm. Yeah, wonderful, fantastic. I think that what I've learned from this conversation is that um, is to pay more attention to the inner child. It's wonderful to be able to have learned this because now I feel like I'm walking away with more self-awareness as where my emotions are coming from. And when I do work with my inner child, I've always been like, hey, what do you need? How can I help you? And I've never ever asked, do you even recognize me? Do you feel safe around me? Do you trust me? So, even for the people who have done this sort of work before, it's nice to have a little more context as to how you can be more respectful and loving and create even more safety for your inner child. So, thank you so much, Shanna, for being on this podcast.
Yeah.
I can't wait to do part 2 and part 3 with you. And to the listeners, we'll catch you in the next episode. Okay, bye.